For some crazy reason, book readers just can't catch a break. It's extremely rare that a film adaptation comes along and isn't immediately compared to its quote-unquote far superior novel. We hear the term original source material all the time, but what does that really mean? More importantly, are we doomed? Is it impossible to get a good film adaptation? Let's talk about that. Before we get into that though, my new website is up. dcferguson.com is a one-stop shop for all things me. You'll find all my latest videos, overviews of my books, exclusive behind-the-scenes videos for each of my series, and you can sign up for my newsletters. I should also mention that you can help me out in a big way if you like this video, subscribe, and share it to your friends that also enjoy storytelling. You may not know this, but every new subscriber makes me do a little dance. I'm still small enough that I see when that number counter goes up by 1. Make me dance for you. That's your weirdness for the weekend. You're welcome. If you've read any novel and later watched the film, you know that adaptations are really hard. Sometimes they're so difficult that the author speaks out against the movie made from their work. Stephen King famously hated Kubrick's The Shining, but ironically, many film adaptations of his work, like the original The Stand, were arguably better than the books. And let's be real, if you know what happened in it, you're probably pretty glad the filmmakers left that part out. Trust me, some things age like milk. I can't even believe it got published in the first place. Stephen King has always been an ideas guy, and at that, he's kind of hit or miss, but when he hits, you get films like The Stand, the original TV miniseries, not that out-of-order, bizarre nonsense we got in 2020. So this little mini argument I just had is kind of at the heart of what we're talking about today. Film is a visual medium, while a good book is a marriage between the thoughts of the writer and the imagination of the reader. Of course, the imagination is going to trump the visual time and again. The image we have in our mind is personal, and when it becomes an actor on a screen wearing the guise of our favorite character, it may meet some people's expectations, but not others. There is a way to make this matter a whole lot less, and we're going to get into that shortly. For now, it's enough to say that this imagination to reality pipeline is where the breakdown occurs, so keep that in mind. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Because of this pipeline we just mentioned, we as audiences need to accept that books and movies are told in two different languages. It is very rare, if ever, that a film is going to use a character's inner monologue, thoughts, or feelings. So that connection audiences have to a character suddenly has reduced intimacy in film. We have to accept them as a person on the screen whose actions we are simply witness to, as opposed to understanding a course of action, their goals, and so on, as if they were a friend and confidant. With film, we're also dealing with time constraints. 2 hours is tough. 90 minutes is crazy. And just look what they did to your boy Aragon. Look at this thick boy. This is a boy that likes cake and tacos. You don't give this boy 90 minutes. You're cutting things at 3 hours. At an hour and a half, you're gutting the work down to its most simple plot and populating the planet with world building you're likely never going to explain. Is high fantasy always doomed in this regard? Well, the Lord of the Rings trilogy says no, but those are over 3 hours. However, time isn't the only reason. Fundamentally, a vast majority of Hollywood writers do not understand why a book is great. Like Ryan George's fictitious pitch meeting producer guy, studio execs aren't readers. They hear some author built an audience for themselves, it's the new hotness, and they want a piece of that action. They don't really care how, because even if it sucks, you're going to go and see it and learn that the hard way. Lately, we're seeing studios even put out trailers that can't put their films in a good enough light to make them successful. People immediately clock that it's not going to be good or it misses the mark somehow, and they check out. Look at I, Robot, starring Will Smith. At the heart of this film is an action movie for Will Smith to be a badass in, and at that, he does well enough. The problem is this Oscar award winner has proven he knows drama, and I, Robot isn't an action story. So why is this the film we got? The book is actually a series of short stories, and the soul of those stories is primarily about ethics and artificial intelligence and whether I think, therefore I am can be extended to robots. That is a far more culturally relevant and deeply philosophical conversation we've been having in science fiction since the book came out 70 years ago. But CG robot go boom and Will Smith chase and smash, buy ticket and stuff face with popcorn. Money. The mismatch of tone, such as ethics and philosophy getting discarded in an action movie, is often what studios do. They use the character names, a loose plot, some flow of the story, and just leave the rest of the meat on the bone. Sometimes all they walk away with is the gristle that no one wants to eat, except those strange little people that like to gnaw on the fat of their steak for 20 minutes. I see you. Take The Golden Compass, for example. In an effort to make a family-friendly film with a giant CG polar bear that looks like it came right out of a Coca-Cola ad, what did we leave behind? Well, how about the original novel's anti-Catholic sentiments and the dark tone that is far more at home with a YA audience than bringing a 6-year-old to the movies to see a giant polar bear? Making this family-friendly was a choice that both alienated fans of the novel and created a film that was too adult for small children and too anti-religion for many of their parents. What you get is a hot mess of compromises. These compromises can also happen visually. Take the original Percy Jackson movies, for example. A Hollywood studio's desire to age up the characters from kids to teens, played by hot, up-and-coming, almost 20-somethings, was again a choice. At the rate it takes to put out a movie, by the time they finished putting out a trilogy, or God forbid 5 books for that matter, the actors would have been close to their 30s still playing kids. So where did they get this right? Well, Harry Potter, of course. They made the movies fast, and the characters aged into their roles as they aged through the books. More importantly, the audience aged with them, and that allowed the later films to be a good bit darker, a little more violent, and their core audience was now old enough to handle those themes. Does that mean we have to adapt the entirety of a novel one-to-one? No. But if that's the case, if we're telling a simplified version of the story, how do we know what to drop? Well, the first thing to understand is what's most important to keep. Take Jurassic Park, for example. No, not those goofy sequels that are a little more like disaster movies with dinosaurs. I'm talking about the original film. The book had a lot more going on behind the scenes than what we saw in the movie, but what did it keep? It kept the themes of the hubris of science, the awe of majestic dinosaurs, and the true horror of what it would look like to not be the apex predator on the planet anymore. It showed corporations gone mad in an arms race to see who gets the licensing rights first, without a care for the fact that they're populating the world with killing machines that are above us on the food chain. There is a direct allegory here between this film and modern AI, or this film and quantum computing, or this film and cloning. You get the point. So the soul of the story, what it means, why it was written, why it works, that has to remain for adaptations to be successful. Another way to make an adaptation successful is to just use the original author in some capacity. Look at Gone Girl. The book was a smash hit. The film was well received. What's the connection? Gillian Flynn wrote both the book and the screenplay. She knew what she was doing with the book, so it was a natural transition to make the compromises for film and adapt them. Now, does that make the book or the film perfect? Of course not. I have more than a few gripes about the playful banter between these two intelligent, attractive people about their conversations in the beginning of the movie. It sounds a lot like what the smart girl in class imagines her future husband and her will sound like when they meet, and it's a bit unrealistic, kind of weird. It's a bit horse girl. I don't know how else to put it. That said, watch the film. You'll see what I mean in the first 10 minutes, and then you can spend the rest of the movie enjoying an absolutely phenomenal and very cynical story about relationships. So, on that note, it's story time. I bring this up because I believe some of my very recent experiences might actually be helpful here for people that are thinking about going down that road to Hollywood. About 6 months ago, I decided to adapt my psychological horror In Shadows into a screenplay. I'm always preaching on this channel to be the change you want to see in storytelling, so I put my money where my mouth is and I adapted a script from one of my own books. Then I went a step further, and I submitted it not to my usual editor, but to an actual Hollywood editor with industry experience. What kind of things did I learn from this experience? Well, a lot, actually. The first thing I learned is this compromise I've been mentioning this entire time. How do I adapt the novel, and what do I commit to lose in the transition? Well, right off the bat, a huge part of what you give up is that internal feeling, the monologue, what the character gives directly to the audience. So now I have to convey a lot of that in dialogue and what kind of actions the character takes. Okay, no big deal, right? I'm dialogue-centric in my writing as it is, so losing a narrative voice shouldn't be that big a deal. Well, yes and no. There is some nuance that gets lost. For example, there's a sub-theme in the book of main character Jack's relationship with religion. His mother was a strict and devout religious figure in his life growing up. She was also abusive. In adult life, he hasn't been to church in many years, while his sister goes every single week without fail. This is the dichotomy of two people growing up in a house where they experience trauma, and they both diverge in personality and how they deal with it. This came from a very personal place, as my sister and I grew up in the same house, but we're about as much different as what we share in common. All of this is so muted in the screenplay that it barely registers at all. Does the book hinge on that? No. It just makes it feel more real, and it informs character decisions, but it's not central to the plot, so off it went. Another thing was size and scope. I basically did a 1-to-1 adaptation of the script as a first draft, and then I refined it down in the editing phase before I passed it off to an editor. This 75,000-word novel was condensed into a 130-page screenplay. You know what the problem is with that? Agents want scripts that are at 120 or under. Cutting 10 pages of a screenplay is like carving out 1/10 of the plot. It's a lot harder to do than you think. Hollywood also speaks out of both sides of its mouth. Recent big, popular Hollywood films like Hereditary clock in at well over 120 pages and were still made to rave reviews. So, rejecting a script based on an arbitrary page count while having a proven track record of successful films that ignore that rule is a little stupid, but I digress. Once you get to this point where you're cutting chunks out of the existing story you have on paper, you have to make some daring compromises. Shorter, snappier dialogue, cutting every single scene that isn't moving the core story forward, dropping subplots. You have to cut mercilessly. Honestly, these concessions to meet arbitrary page counts started to feel more like I was trying to make a shorter version of the book that still hit the same. I myself started to feel that ugh reaction we feel when we see an adaptation taking liberties with our beloved stories. What happened when I got it back from the editor? Well, I'm still working through all of the recommendations and making the edits as we speak today, but the short version is he did exactly what I needed him to. He showed me how Hollywood scripts need to be formatted, how to block out scenes in the script with more concise direction. He complimented my dialogue as being authentic and realistic, which I took as high praise. But now for the most alarming thing. You, my fellow storytellers out there with little to no experience in screenwriting, yeah, it's exactly what you're afraid of. You're not going to like this part. The biggest edits to the script were complete removals of any kind of line delivery, emotional state, or feeling belonging to the characters. As it was explained to me, these kinds of details are not for me, the writer, to put into the script. Those details are for the director and actor to interpret or read into what's on the page and give their own take or vision of what it should be. To all that, all I can ever say is, have you seen the garbage getting put out in theaters over the past few years? I mean, maybe these directors need a little hand-holding, am I right? Remember, there was a vision behind Cats, a film so bad most people have memory hold it, despite being as beloved a Broadway production as Wicked. As for the actors, look, I watched Gladiator 2 because Denzel Washington was in it, and let me tell you, that man stole every scene he was in. I adored his character, his performance, everything. Does that mean it was a good movie? God, no, it was trash. Then you have actors like Jamie Lee Curtis. Despite being well-known, well-loved, the star of dozens of films, she still felt the need to sign up for this 27th Halloween movie. The franchise is dead. This was a soulless cash grab. How badly does she really need the money that she would debase herself to star in such a garbage movie? So, with that in mind, I'm not so sure I trust actors either. They can do a great job with a terrible script, but they can also sign up for slop that I kind of feel like they knew was slop when they agreed to it. No one read the script for Madam Web and thought it was good. I refuse to believe that. But yeah, as the writer, I was expected to edit away important notes. The whole while I'm thinking to myself, how are they going to know to play this character like this if I don't tell them? Hope they read the book? And the answer is, yeah, kinda. Scary, isn't it? Maybe now you're starting to see why adaptation is such a mixed bag. Now, one place where adaptation really shines is smaller stories. The novella The Hellbound Heart turned into the horror classic Hellraiser. I have never seen a bad Shakespeare adaptation. As a matter of fact, I can't decide if my favorite Hamlet is Kevin Branagh or Mel Gibson. The Gary Sinise and John Malkovich production of Mice and Men is probably one of the single greatest movies I've ever seen, adaptation or not. I adore this movie, and I have seen it more times than I can count. Small scale means fewer compromises, more space for our stories to breathe, but they're also simple stories. The Hellbound Heart is about a girl caught up as agents from hell come to collect her uncle that has escaped them. That sentence probably sums up the entire through line of the story. Of Mice and Men is about a pair of simple migrant workers in the 1920s and the struggle of that life. What you get is exactly that. Of course, there's so much more to it than that, but it's nice when you can add nuance to a film adaptation instead of taking it away. So, what's the solution to all this? What do we take away from this discussion today? Well, nothing beats your imagination, so don't bother trying. My idea of Lenny in Of Mice and Men would never have imagined a hulking-looking John Malkovich in that role. I knew him too well as an incredibly intelligent actor, so how can he possibly play a mentally challenged farmhand? But of course, when you watch the film, it doesn't matter at all because he does such a superb job with it. Despite me saying that, there's probably someone out there that absolutely hates him in it and thinks he ruined their favorite Steinbeck novel. The point is, you're going to make someone upset with adaptation. What makes it forgivable? Well, the soul of the story must survive. That's the whole reason our stories resonate with each other, right? The story tells some kind of truth we all understand and gives us something to question and ponder, and it does so in this frame of watching that question or that truth play out before us. If you take away the question, what else is there? Unfortunately, the answer is often nothing good, and that's why adaptations fail. Most people don't know this about me, but in high school, all I did was read stage plays. I mean, I was a vacuum for novels back then too, but I literally read my entire high school library out of stage plays. It is so easy to take the written word and adapt it for stage and screen. It's only when we need to start making those compromises that the story begins to suffer. In that regard, it's a lot like a cake. Take away too much frosting and you're eating dry, sweet bread. Take away too much cake and you're eating a pile of creamy sugar. The juggling act is getting the compromises just right, so the soul of the story stays intact. Don't forget to check out my new website. The link is in the description below. You'll also find a link to my newsletter in the comments where you can get a free book, read about all of my latest projects, and find other indie authors for your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, have fun and get crafting.